We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to our How to Play Warhammer 40k 9th edition series. This series of videos is made specifically for beginners to both the hobby and specifically to Warhammer 40k. It is not going to assume that you really know anything about Warhammer 40k from previous editions, or that you've even really played other miniature war games. Even though I might allude to them sometimes, I'll make sure that every explanation is for somebody who's an absolute beginner. And so we're going to break this up into a lot of different videos because there's a lot of rules to cover. But we want to do it bit by bit so that you can come into this hobby and enjoy the awesome game, which is Warhammer 40k. In this first video, we're going to talk about the things you need to get started and the basic phases of the game. Every single one of these videos is going to be accompanied by a how to play battle report. These are battle reports that are much smaller in points and power level that are designed to teach beginners how to play as well, except they're going to show it in action. So they're not going to tell you every last little thing, but they're going to explain the rules a lot more than we would in our typical battle report. There will be a link to each battle report in each episode's description. Now, these battle reports are in the MiniWarGaming Vault, which is a paid members area that helps support us in doing all of this. So if you'd like to see us make more videos, then please consider becoming a MiniWarGaming Vault member. And even if you're not sure, you can still click the link after the video and get a free 7-day trial to get instant access to all the videos in the Vault and decide for yourself. What you need. The first thing you absolutely need is, of course, a Warhammer 40k rulebook. This is the one from the Indominus box set, but you can buy one separate from that box, or even buy it digitally through your iTunes or Google store. This book, of course, contains a whole lot of lore, pictures, and most importantly, the rules to the game. You cannot play it without it. You also need the codex for the army that you are specifically playing. For example, the one on the left is for the Adeptus Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle, and the one on the right here is for Chaos Space Marines. Now, these change from time to time, so make sure you have the one that has the latest rules. So the main rule book has the rules for the game, but the rules for your individual models and units are found inside of these books. Optionally, you may also want to buy the supplements for your codex. For example, there's a bunch of different books called Psychic Awakening that give additional rules for your armies. When you're just starting out though, ignore these for now, but realize that they do exist. Now, these ones may no longer exist. The easiest way to know what is still valid is to go to games-workshop.com and see what they are currently selling. You need the latest chapter approved. They come out with one of these every single year. These are the ones that came out with the launch of 9th edition. So it has the Grand Tournament Pack for 2020 and the Munitorum Field Manual, which contains the updated points values for your armies. So you have to ignore the ones that are in the codices usually and refer to these instead. Every year they create a new chapter approved with new missions and new points updates. So make sure you have the latest one. This might seem obvious, but you're going to need models to play with. Now, these don't have to be painted. In fact, for your first game, you might want to just have them partially assembled because you don't know necessarily which weapons you want to give them, but they always look better painted. You're also going to want a table to play on, preferably with some sort of gaming mat and some terrain on the table. Now, you don't have to have anything fancy for this. You can just use your kitchen table and books and cups and whatever else you can find to represent hills and buildings. When Dave and I started playing years and years ago, that's all we used, and we had a lot of fun. You're going to want a lot of 6-sided dice. These are often referred to in the book as D6s or even by other individuals. So if you're confused what that means, a D6 is a 6-sided die. The D stands for dice, and the 6 is how many sides. And you want a lot of these, 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on the army that you are playing. Also, it's important to note that in the game, they might refer to a D3 or a 3-sided die. Now, they're not actually referring to a die that has 3 sides. What they're referring to is you rolling a D6 and dividing it by 2 rounded up. So a 1 or a 2 is a 1, a 3 or a 4 is a 2, and a 5 or a 6 is a 3. These are very common, so get used to seeing D6 and D3 in the rules. One note I should point out is if something says it has 2d6 or 3d6, this just refers to the number of dice that you are rolling. So if it says that you charge 2d6 inches, you would take 2 dice, roll them, and add them together, and that's how far you would go. So you don't treat them individually. If it says 2d6 or sometimes 3d6, you would roll and you would add them all up. So this would be a 12. You need a measuring tape that measures in inches. You might not like the fact that you have to play in inches, and you might prefer the metric system, but it doesn't matter. The rules are written for inches, so you just have to get used to that. You'll need a set of 6 objective markers. Now this could really be anything, but they suggest that they are circular and 40 millimeters in width. And yes, I realize the thing that they measure in inches, but then they tell you to do it 40 millimeters. They like to mix them. While definitely not necessary to play, there are a few other things that you'll find handy. For example, some different dice, like this is a 20-sided die or a 12-sided die or a 10-sided die, because often you have to keep track of wounds or hit points on something that has a lot of them. And so if it has 10 hit points, for example, and it goes down to 9, you can't really show that on a single D6. So it's nice to have a D12 to show how many wounds remain on a unit or on a model. Also, I like to have small D6s to differentiate when I'm marking wounds and counters next to models as opposed to the ones that I'm rolling. But some people prefer just to roll smaller D6s as well. And the other thing that you see right here is what we call a measuring widget. There are different kinds of these. The one right here is a simple one that measures 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inches, because a lot of things in the game require you to know if you are within an inch, or some other games that you play, such as Age of Sigmar, need to know if you're within 3 inches or 2 inches. So this is a handy little tool to have along rather than having to use a measuring tape for those small measurements. Data sheets. In a game of Warhammer 40k, all your models are divided up into units. Now these might just be a unit of one monster or one vehicle or one special character, or it might be a unit of troops that number anywhere from 5 to 10 or maybe 20 or 30 or 40 models. Every single unit has a data sheet. The data sheets can usually be found in your codices and contain all the rules necessary to use that unit in a game of Warhammer 40k. For example, the data sheet that you see here is for an assault intercessor squad from the Space Marines in the Indomitus box. At the very top, you see the unit name. At the top right, you see its battlefield role, which will be troop or elite, heavy support, HQ, and a few others. Again, you don't have to understand what that means yet until we get into how to build your army. Next, you find its power rating, to be used in open play and narrative games. If you're playing more competitive, you're going to ignore this and instead use the points level from the Munitorium Field Guide or chapter approved. Next, you find the profiles. And here is a lot of different information. For example, you see under NO, or the number, is that there are 4 to 9 assault intercessors and 1 assault intercessor sergeant. So this tells you the composition. So we know here we have 5 to 10 models, one of which must be the assault intercessor sergeant. We then have under M, which is move, how far they can normally move in the movement phase. WS is weapon skill. This is the number you need to roll in order to hit in close combat. BS is ballistic skill, which is the number you have to roll to hit when you are shooting. We have their strength, which is usually used in close combat to inflict wounds. Their toughness, their resilience against taking damage. Their wounds, in other words, if you're familiar with role-playing games or other games, then you might think of these as hit points, how many times they can be hurt before they are removed and killed. Then they have their attacks. This is how many dice they get to use when they are fighting in close combat. Next, we have their leadership, which shows how brave they are and how unlikely they are, or likely they are, to run from the battlefield once they start sustaining casualties. And last on the profiles is their saving throw. This is how resilient their armor is if you manage to actually wound them in combat. Next up, we have their composition and war gear. And all of these tell you exactly what they are normally outfitted with. So this one talks about how every model is equipped with a heavy bolt pistol, Astartes chainsword, frag grenades, and crack grenades. And then right below that, you'll actually see the profiles of the weapons themselves. They'll say what the range of the weapon is, what type they are, their strength, their armor penetration, their damage, and any special abilities. Again, if this all seems overwhelming, don't worry. We're going to cover all of this in future videos as we go over how to shoot, how to fight, how to move, how to do psychic powers, and everything else. So just understand where this information is found rather than being overwhelmed by it. We also have the unit abilities, and this will cover things like, for example, the assault intercessors. If you bring 10 models, then when they're deployed, they can actually be split up into 2 units of 5 rather than having to stay together as 10. Any other abilities will be listed here and either will be explained here or they'll tell you to reference your codex, which will have a general rule for every model or unit with this. For example, the Angels of Death ability is actually in the Codex Space Marines because pretty much every Space Marine unit has that ability. Next, you have war gear options. So these are the different ways that you're allowed to outfit your models. The ones for the Assault Intercessors are pretty restricted. You can have the Assault Intercessor Sergeant be equipped with a plasma pistol instead of a heavy bolt pistol. Sometimes there are a lot of war gear options, and so it pays to play some games, figure out what they do, and then make the decision of what you'd like to actually model your guys to have. Then we have a list of keywords. Now this can get a little more complicated, so we're not going to talk too much about this, but you have faction keywords which describe which factions you are part of. For example, this Space Marine is part of the Imperium. He is also Adeptus Astartes, which is just a fancy way of saying Space Marine. We also have that chapter keyword with those brackets around it, which means that you're able to choose which chapter they are from. In other words, which subfaction they are from. And we'll talk about that maybe in a future video. Next up, we have its normal keywords. For example, it is infantry, it is primaris, and it is assault intercessor squad. If this seems verbose, it's for a purpose, because you're going to find a lot of rules will say infantry units will do such and such. Infantry units will have this restriction. If you are an infantry unit or you're firing at an infantry, so whenever they say an infantry unit, they're referring to a unit that has the keyword infantry. So it's very clear when a unit is being referred to. Measuring distances. Before you play your first game of Warhammer 40k, you need to understand how to measure distances between models and between units and what the different terminology means. The distance between two models is always the distance between the two closest points of those models. For example, the distance between this specific Blade Guard veteran and this specific Necron Crypto Thrall is 5 inches because I'm measuring from this point to this point. I'm not measuring to the back of his base or from the back of this model's base. Now, models are organized into units, such as these 3 Blade Guard veterans or these 2 Necron Crypto Thralls. If you want to know the distance between 2 units and not 2 models, you measure the distance between the 2 closest models from those units. So once again, the distance between these 2 units would be 5 inches, not 6 inches or even 7 inches if we measure to this Crypto Thrall. Sometimes you need to know if a model is wholly within a certain number of inches of somebody else, usually to get some sort of bonus from a character or maybe for some other purpose. In order for something to be wholly within, then every part of its base must be within. For example, if we're measuring the distance from this model to this Blade Guard, we can say that it is wholly within 7 inches because it's more than 6 inches, but it's wholly within 7. And this unit, you would measure to every single model. So we're looking at this unit is wholly within 8 inches of the Blade Guard veterans because every model is wholly within 8 inches of the Blade Guard veterans. So remember, there is a difference between within and wholly within. In order to be within a distance, any part of the base needs to be within that. To be wholly within, every part of the base and every other model from that unit has to be wholly within. Building your first army. This is where things can get a little complicated. The way to build your army in a proper match play game, in other words, a competitive game, has a lot of different rules about how you organize your models and units into detachments, how you pay for points, limitations on that, command points, and all sorts of other things that I don't want to distract you with right now. For your first game of Warhammer 40k, especially if you are playing against somebody else who is also learning the game, I suggest you just do the following. Look at your data sheets, look at the power of your units, and try to bring an equivalent amount of power in your army as your opponent brings in his. It doesn't have to be perfect. The game is not perfectly balanced even when you do have equivalent power on both sides, for so many different reasons. So just have fun and try to learn for your first few games. So if you're bringing a bunch of units and there's a 5 power unit and an 8 power unit and a 4 power unit, well, that would be 17 power and your opponent should bring roughly the same amount of power. Once you get good at that, we'll cover in a future video how to build armies using points values, detachments, talking about command points, and all that stuff that'll make you have a lot more restrictions, but hopefully also plays the game a little more competitively. The battle round. I've already given you a lot of information, so the thing I'm going to leave you with for the end of this video is talking about how the game is organized into phases. Basically, there are battle rounds in the game, typically 5 battle rounds, but there could be more or less depending on the scenario that you are going to play. And one battle round, each player takes 1 turn. So there's a difference between a round and a turn. So you have battle round, player turn, player turn. Then you go to the next battle round, player turn, next battle round, and so on and so forth. This is important because sometimes you'll see rules that say before the first battle round, or at the end of your turn, or at the beginning of the movement phase. And you need to know when these abilities or special abilities and rules are triggered. Now, each player turn is then turned into 7 phases. 1, command phase. In this phase, you normally gain a command point, sometimes score objectives, and resolve any rules that occur in the command phase. It's typically pretty fast. Number 2, movement phase. In the movement phase, you will, guess what, move your models. They might move towards the enemy to get ready to engage them, or they might move to more strategic positions to shoot from. You can't move too close to your enemies though, unless you're charging, and that's in a different phase, but we'll cover that in a future video. Number 3, psychic phase. If your army contains psychers, such as this Space Marine librarian, in this phase you can attempt to manifest psychic abilities, which your opponent can also attempt to deny if they also have psychers or special abilities. Number 4, shooting phase. In your shooting phase, you can select units that have guns that are in range, pick your targets, and roll the dice to see if you hurt them. Number 5, charge phase. The charge phase is usually the only phase that you can move your models into close combat, which is usually within an inch of the enemy. So for example, these Blade Guard veteran might declare a charge against the Necrons, we roll it, and they get to move 7 inches. And this is where we would actually try to engage them, so we can be prepared to fight them in the following phase. Number 6, fight phase. Units that have charged or are within engagement range, which is usually an inch of enemy models or units, are able to be picked to fight. They pile in first, and then swing their weapons by rolling lots of dice to see if they have any impact. Number 7, morale phase. In this phase, you go through each unit that has suffered any casualties and you see if any of their models will actually run away. You do this usually by rolling a d6 and adding up the number of models that left the unit, but we'll cover all those rules later on. Once a player has completed all 7 phases, it is the other player's turn. Once both players have taken a turn, a new battle round commences, and you do this over and over again until somebody concedes and asks for mercy, or the game ends because you ran out of turns or time. You then tally up whatever score it is that you're using for the scenario and find out who won. In your first game, just plop the models down a certain distance away and see who can kill the most within 5 turns. Don't worry too much about objectives or anything else. You're going to have enough to remember as it is. Now that's all we're going to cover in this video. I feel like I've already thrown a lot of information at you, especially if you are brand new to Warhammer 40k. So that is why we have prepared a special battle report for you in the MiniWarGaming Vault. This battle report is going to walk you through all of this, but in a more practical way. I don't expect you to watch the battle report and understand everything that's going on, but what it will do is start to expose you to some of the nuances of how all of these things play together. And in the battle report, they're actually going to go over rules that we haven't even discussed yet. So it's really okay if you watch it and are a little confused. Try to enjoy it and try to see how the game feels and plays out. So that is available right now in the MiniWarGaming Vault, which, as I said at the beginning of the video, is a paid subscription service for MiniWarGaming. It is what allows us to do all of this. It pays for our studios, it pays for our employees, it pays for our models and terrain, and every other fee that is associated with running a business such as this. We just don't get enough money from advertising revenue from YouTube. It's just such a small portion that we couldn't do this. So if you like our videos, please consider being a Vault member and supporting us. And even if you're not sure, you can still click the link and get a free 7-day trial, get instant access to all sorts of videos, especially the one that we want you to watch right now, and see for yourself if you want to stick around. Because I have a funny feeling that once you're in there, you'll like what you see. So go check out that battle report. Stay tuned for more how to play Warhammer 40k 9th edition videos. And let me know in the comments what you'd like clarified or what future videos you'd like to be covered. Happy wargaming.